Are enterprises not intelligent enough for artificial intelligence? That seems to be the case. Let's talk about it. So welcome back to AI Insights and Innovation, the one place where you can learn about the realities of AI and how to make it work for your enterprise. I'm your host, David Linthicum, author, speaker, B-list geek. Let's get started. So this actually came from some questions I got from reporters and a few people who follow me on LinkedIn in terms of how come we're not seeing more success with AI in the enterprises after we've been dealing with about the 10th resurgence of it with the rise of generative AI. And it's interesting. In other words, what's going on where the enterprises are unable to find the value? So the biggest one would be that enterprises are still not data ready for AI. And it's amazing how many Fortune 500 companies claim they're leaning into AI, yet recent research shows 61% admit their data assets simply aren't ready for generative AI to make an impact. And so that comes down to what I'm also seeing in the market as well. The reality is that AI is a representation of the enterprise data. The only value or the real value we're going to get out of generative AI, agentic AI, whatever flavor you're going to use, is the ability to leverage our data, the data associated with our business, in ways that allow us to find a great deal of value. In other words, logistics, supply chain, inventory optimization, customer experience improvements, all that kind of stuff comes from our information. And if our data is not ready for AI, it's not in good hygienic shape, then that's something that won't become a reality. And I think many of the enterprises are finding that out right now. In other words, they're trying to do their first pilot generative AI projects, things like that. They're normally going for a moonshot, spending many millions of dollars in making it happen and not paying attention to the data asset in terms of improving its quality and its reliability. And that's going to be a huge mistake. So the second would be scaling AI is still a pipe dream for most. Every board meeting seems to mention AI pilots, but the reality is less than a third of these make it out of the sandbox and drive real business outcomes. Despite 77% of enterprises experimenting with AI, most admit fewer than 30% of their pilots will ever scale in the near future. In other words, they're building these prototypical systems, typically proof of concept prototypes, but there's no ability to turn them into real production environments. In other words, they're not going to be able to use them for business, even though they spend a lot of money and they have a tremendous amount of value, because they haven't been built for scalability. They haven't figured out how to use this thing in terms of a business production. And that's going to be a big limiting factor, because unless you architect these things to scale, they're not going to scale. And I think many enterprises are finding that out as they're pushing them out into production. They can't go over a certain capacity limit, and that's going to hugely limit the value of these prototypes that enterprises are building now. So the real bottleneck, leadership, not workers. I hear a lot about workforce resistance, but the hard truth is leadership inertia is the bigger problem. Too few executives are willing to set a pragmatic strategy and stick to it. And that's what holds back AI adoption and cultural changes within these businesses out there. So many cases, my clients will point to the rank and file within these companies. Those guys are the ones who are limiting our use of AI. They're unable to accept it, as a reality. That's almost never the case. It's really poor leadership in the ability to define a strategy, to communicate a strategy, and to get it out into the zeitgeist of the company that this is something that's going to be real and changing. You'll find that people who are working at companies like that are going to adapt to any technological changes they have for the last 100 years. And AI is going to be no exceptions. It's just not being led correctly out there. The understanding's not there. They can't explain the value of it. They can't explain the reasons that the workforce should pay attention to it. And that's why it's failing. So stop blaming your employees, but look to yourself, because ultimately that's going to be the strategic guidance that's going to make AI successful. So next, most enterprises still can't quantify AI ROI. So let's be honest, most generative AI projects end up as shiny proofs of concept. According to McKinsey, while spending on AI is up, over 80% of organizations do not see measurable impact on the bottom line because they can't scale or integrate AI into the business. So ultimately, you have to have some sort of a business value in doing this. Keep in mind that AI can be 5 to 10 times the cost of a traditional analog system. In other words, we're making, two logistics management systems, one that's built upon generative AI and one that's not, using traditional technology. The generative AI built application is going to be 5 to 10 times the cost, and certainly 5 to 10 times the cost to operate it as well. It needs special processors, huge amounts of data storage, inference processing, things like that, and different operations procedures, ML ops. So without that understanding and of what the business value is going to be for this particular technology, you really kind of have no business building it. So, this seems to be something that's going to be a fit in some instances, not a fit in others. And I think people are overusing it now in problem domains, use cases that don't require AI, and they don't have an ROI, and that's why they're failing. So next, talent and governance are critical choke points. You can't do enterprise scale AI without the right skills and guardrails. Talent shortages and governance gaps remain the primary reason 35% of companies stall out on their AI journey. So we need to develop talent pipelines and real governance, not just throw tools and money at the problem, which is the way it's going on right now. So most enterprises that I talk to don't have an idea as to where their talent's going to be coming from. They can't define if they're going to get them from consulting. They're going to hire off the labor market. They're going to train in-house with their existing IT assets. And without that, you have no knowledgeable way of figuring out how things are going to get done. And also lacking governance in these things as well, both ethical and technical, the ability to put guardrails around the utilization of AI so it's going to be used effectively. Without that, people are going to misdeploy this technology a great deal, as we're seeing in the press now. Many organizations are pushing out agentic-based systems, generative AI-based systems that aren't ready for prime time because they don't have the talent inside the organization to make them ready for prime time. It takes a special type of architect or a special type of developer to make these things consistently work. And there's very few people on the job market now that are capable of doing that. Enterprises can't find them. They're pushing forward anyway, and they're getting stuck, and they're failing. So AI will redefine the enterprise, but we're not ready yet. So AI is now a boardroom priority, with 83% of executives putting it at the top of the agenda. But the truth is, most organizations lack the culture and systems to make it work. It's not the technology that's lacking intelligence. It's the enterprise's ability to adopt, adapt, and transform. So this becomes a people issue. It's not a problem with the technology. The technology is just fine. It's growing, it's changing. We understand that, but it works, if it's used effectively. This is going to be a mix of leadership problems. We have a lack of leadership out there. They're able to create a strategic focus for the utilization of AI, the ability to communicate a business case and the use cases and the business problems that it's able to solve, and therefore the inability to put this into a scalable, productive path where it's going to bring massive amounts of value back to the business. And it has to, because if we're going to be deploying AI in our enterprises, it's going to be hugely expensive. It's going to take up a lot of resources. And at the end of the day, if we don't able to translate that into business value coming back pretty quickly into the enterprise, then we're going to get stuck. And we're going to make the same kind of mistake that we made over and over for the last 30 years, where we adopt technology in an incorrect and improper way, and it fails. It doesn't have to fail. Get smart. So anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe and check out our other videos here on theCUBE. Also check out my Cloud Computing InfoWorld blog, my 130 plus LinkedIn learning courses, and my latest book, An Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing. So until next time, you guys stay very safe. Later.